with us and see how you're doing. But without further ado, here's Dr. Burkett.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabrina. Nicely done. So I was thinking about how to introduce you, and it dawned on me after dinner last night. This is the 4th year you've been here. That means every student in this room already knows you. I think, right? Everybody in the room would have had a chance to have heard you teach or have lunch with you or go hiking with you. So I don't know what needs to be said other than that we're extremely grateful that you're back.
Of course, I'm thrilled.
We're always happy to hear your thoughts. And 2 years ago, you gave a talk, I think it was 2 years ago, on the Sistine Chapel. And this is a long-awaited follow-up to that, the sequel to this. So we're very grateful that you've returned, and always look forward to your visit. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Wayne Ambler. You don't need this, right?
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and thank you very much, Ashbrook Center. I'm thrilled to be here. This is my 4th visit to the Ashbrook program, and generally I've been speaking on Xenophon in some way or shape or another, but this will be my 2nd talk with an art historical emphasis. 2 years ago, I spoke on the Sistine Chapel, and this was the first slide from that. So it was a focus on Michelangelo, not Machiavelli, for goodness sake. Focus on Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel. So this is a kind of follow-up. I should confess to all of you that I was not a student of art history as an undergraduate, nor even as a graduate student. And when I think back to myself when I was your age, I probably would have been very happy to be out, let's say, playing baseball or tennis, as opposed to going through an art museum. I was slow to appreciate the power of art. And by an accident, my university some long time ago said to me, "Wayne, you're assigned to go teach history in Rome. Go." And I accepted this assignment, and the minute I set foot in Rome, my first time out of the country, I fell in love with the city and fell in love also with the art and architecture that is all over that city. Beautiful museums, but also beautiful buildings that you have to look at as you just walk down the street. So that's the basis of my interest, not so much former studies as a visit to Rome. And that visit, I was assigned 1 year to stay in Rome, and I loved it so much that, having read Xenophon's Education of Cyrus on how to conquer the world, I was able at least to conquer my department back in the United States and be assigned to stay, not 1 year, but 10. So that was very nice, and that's the basis for this talk. Now, 2 years ago, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, and my goal, by the way, is to help you feel the excitement that I came to feel by going to Rome and seeing these wonderful objects of art, these wonderful frescoes in this particular case. So 2 years ago, we talked about Michelangelo, and you may recall that he was commissioned by Julius II to paint the Sistine Chapel. And you may also recall that, you might think surprisingly, he did not want the job. He did not want this wonderful opportunity to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel because he was a sculptor and understood himself to be a sculptor. And Julius wanted then for him to perfect a new art, and the art of fresco painting. He had done some fresco paintings, don't get me wrong, but this was not his specialty. So he fought back against Julius, and Julius being the Pope, and the Pope being very important at the time, Michelangelo lost the battle and turned out to deliver us to us this absolutely magnificent series of paintings, including later the Last Judgment. Now, I just wanted to mention briefly, this could be a topic of a talk in itself, but just the art of fresco painting that Michelangelo did not want to devote himself to. It's very difficult because fresco means fresh, and a fresco is painted in fresh plaster. So you put a thin layer of plaster on a very large wall, and then you paint it. And that makes things complicated because the fresco is drying, and you need to get the paint on that plaster before it dries. So you have got a time deadline. As the plaster dries, the pigment is hardened into the surface of the plaster and can stay there, in the case of some frescoes that we have from old Egypt, for 3,000 years, or in others from Tiryns in Greece for 2,000 years. So there's an advantage gained by the sort of solidity of what you end up with, but the challenge of doing it over a vast space, like on this whole back wall, where you would have to take into account the proportions of the figures and keep them more or less consistent over that whole wall. Big deal. So Julius II also was a man of great ambition, and he also challenged Bramante, who is the best architect in Rome at the time. At the same time he's commissioning Michelangelo, he commissions Bramante to tear down the old St. Peter's Basilica and build a new one, very beginning of the 16th century. I was stunned when I first went to Rome, being ignorant of these things, to find that this magnificent St. Peter's Basilica, you can see it on the right, you visit today, I saw, oh my gosh, this is amazing, it's older than the United States Constitution. Well, yes, that's true, but the one to the left was there for 1,200 years before they built the one that's on the right. So you've got a long traditions of St. Peter's Basilicas, and Julius II is the guy who said, take this one on the left, Bramante, and tear it down. So gradually that happened. But then thirdly, Julius II commissioned a second artist, and this is Raphael, to paint in the Vatican Museum, what are today the Vatican Museums, the apartments of the Pope. And you can see Michelangelo on the left and Raphael on the right. Michelangelo, this probably is not a self-portrait, it's disputed, but a portrait of the older Michelangelo. And we don't have a portrait of the older Raphael, unfortunately, because he died at age 37. Michelangelo worked till he was 88 or 89, that's 50-some years longer in terms of his career, but Raphael was still tremendously productive. And remarkably, these two artists were commissioned by Julius II to work in the same general area, just a couple hundred feet apart. This is where Raphael worked, the three stanze, the three rooms, or I'm sorry, not three, four rooms, the four stanze, 4 rooms. We'll go through them quickly. And then here's the Sistine Chapel, very close by. As evidence that this is not Raphael's only work, here's the Loggia of Raphael. He also painted that. So he was a very busy man, had a lot of work with Julius II. I should note that these projects were very expensive. Tear down this huge basilica and build a new one. Get Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Get Raphael to paint these rooms. These are expensive projects. And Julius II's disgraceful ways of paying for these projects was a cause of the Protestant Reformation. So I need to say a word on the Renaissance in general, so this is very brief, but Renaissance obviously means rebirth. Rebirth of what? In my way of thinking about it, it's a rebirth of enthusiasm for learning, and in some cases imitating classical antiquity in its various different departments. Can we recover what they knew, what they did, and do it again ourselves? And so the thought is that somewhere between ancient Rome and ancient Greece and the time of the Renaissance, important things had been lost and they needed to be recovered. Some little evidence of this attitude is Dante taking a pagan poet Virgil and making him his guide through the first 2/3 of the Divine Comedy. Other evidence is Machiavelli taking Livy as his guide and working through the Discorsi. These are tributes that Renaissance authors and artists pay to their predecessors in antiquity. And Michelangelo also was influenced by classical antiquity in this way. And so as various statues are pulled out of the earth, which was happening, Michelangelo studied them in order to help his own art and architecture. This is the Laocoon that you see on the left, still in the Vatican Museums, and also the Belvedere torso on the right that is still in the Vatican Museums in case you go there. Very influential on Michelangelo. And then as for Raphael, he was actually commissioned by Pope Leo X to go out and study all Roman ruins, make drawings of them so that a good record of those ruins would be retained for posterity. And he was challenged to go out and actually reconstruct them in art, paint what they did look like when they existed, even if they're half gone or 2/3 gone. Unfortunately, Raphael got this commission late-ish in life and did not live to carry it out very much. This is, however, one of his drawings of the Pantheon that you can visit in Rome today. Now, Raphael learned this from his going around Rome and doing these studies. That is, that the ruins, the ancient ruins, were disappearing fast. So you had old buildings that were there, and then they would disappear. And this is because these old buildings were being used to make new buildings. Their materials were being harvested, you could say, by the popes in order to build new, beautiful cathedrals or basilicas. And Raphael had the difficult challenge of writing a letter to the Pope, his boss, protesting this practice. So he said, "If it is permitted for me to speak without offense, what time barbarians and wars have spared has been destroyed by the popes. How many have pulled down ancient temples, statues, arches, and other noble works of glory of antiquity to make lime." So one point is that one evidence when you go to Rome that's, I think, quite impressive is you'll see in many churches, you'll see that there are mismatched pieces. So here we have a granite column on the right. Here's a marble column in the center that's fluted a different style, another granite column without a column base on the left, because these were taken from different places to reuse. It's much easier if you're building something in Rome to take something from a building that's already in Rome instead of going to find a mountain somewhere, carving a hunk of stone out of it, transporting it to Rome, trimming it to size. That's hard. So take what's available. Midnight building supply, something like that. But as you heard in the quotation from Raphael that I just quoted, it's also taken, these old materials are taken to make lime. So in Rome, there were kilns set up near the places where there were old buildings with lots of limestone used in them and marble used in them. You can take those chunks of marble, column bases, beautiful statues, whatever it may be, throw it into a kiln, turn up the heat, and you get lime. And you can use that lime to make plaster or for fertilizer. And so the city was being consumed in this fashion. And Raphael faced the difficult challenge of making the popes aware of this and trying to call a halt to this procedure. One other quotation from this same letter from Raphael to Leo X says, "My work of drawing the old monuments, which you assign me to do, will not only be a work of eternal honor to your holiness, but it will also be the greatest utility. For from the study of ancient architecture, many things may be learned which are of advantage to modern building." Utility, advantage. "And seeing how much greater were the works of the ancients than those of our own times, it will be clear that we should take them, the ancients, as our masters, and seek to restore that form and that beauty which has been for so long lost." My simple point is that Raphael, like others in his time, did not seek only to learn about antiquity. They sought to learn from antiquity, how to do things that would be useful and of advantage in their own time. So it's not an exercise in curiosity to know the names and the dates of the emperors. It's how to do what they did. Now, obviously, one of the points of superiority that Raphael had in mind was art and architecture. But as I think this fresco shows, there were other ways in which he and others of the time thought about other of the virtues of the ancients besides art and architecture. This enthusiasm for antiquity came with a difficulty, and that difficulty that I have in mind is the difficulty that we're living in very Christian times when the popes were rulers of central Italy and very influential all over the West. It was Christian era. And so the thought of going back and recovering the examples of classical antiquity was a morally and theologically sensitive action, because it could seem like a slight to the reigning faith and the reigning practices of the day. So some characters from the Renaissance, an example would be Savonarola. I don't have time to spend much with him, but at the moment, I'll just give you that name. He was famous in Florence for conducting what are now known as the bonfires of the vanities, where big fires would be created, and all of these nice arts that were somehow or another ultimately linked to the ancients would be put to flame, even paintings by the great Renaissance artist Botticelli. So I only mean to say this, it's a sensitive issue, how much to emphasize the ancient when you're in a Christian age, a very deep and thoroughly Christian age. So now let's get to the 4 Raphael rooms. There are 4 stanze, that's the word they're usually referred to, or rooms. The most famous and the one that I'll concentrate on the most is the first. It was the first done chronologically, the room of the signature, stanza della segnatura, or maybe more aptly called just the room of the library, because this was to be the library for the Pope, Pope Julius II. Then a second room, which takes the name of the room of Heliodorus, a third, the room of the fire, and the fourth, the hall of Constantine. Because time is short, I'm going to focus on the first and the fourth and leave out entirely the second and the third. So that we're talking about basically 16 huge frescoes, 4 rooms, 4 walls per room, 16 huge frescoes. I'm taking 8 out. I'm speaking about the Stanza della Segnatura and the Sala di Costantina. Why do I take this shortcut? Because I have this simple thesis to suggest to you that, and I really meant to emphasize when I mentioned that I don't have a full art history background, that you should doubt what I say. You should challenge it and see whether you agree. You should do that even if I do have an art history background, by the way. It's called critical thinking, and I encourage it. So what I'm suggesting to you is that my first main thesis is that I think there's a qualitative difference between these 2 main rooms that I'll focus on, Constantine and the library. And I put the other 2, fire and Heliodorus, with Constantine. So it's 3 against 1. I'm going to explain what those differences are and why I think the Stanza della Segnatura is really so much better than they are. But that's the thesis to be established. It's not a point that you should accept at the outset. So here's the Hall of Constantine. This I'd like to run through. It's done in 1520 to 24. It's got 4 frescoes: the Vision of the Cross, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, the Baptism of Constantine, and it has the Donation of Constantine. That means nothing to you at first, but here we go. So this is just one corner of the Sala di Costantino. There are 2 large frescoes at the bottom. Those are done by Raphael's group, not by him personally, but by his students. He may have designed them, which is a big part of the job, you might imagine. Then above is later artists who come a bit later. Here's the first main fresco of the Sala di Costantino. It's very big, busy, complicated, impressive, but what I want to stress is it takes up a very important subject. The whole room takes up a very important subject, and that is, what did Constantine do in and for Rome? Or put differently, how did the whole Roman Empire change from being pagan to Christian? And as it turns out, Constantine, who came to Rome in the early part of the 4th century, won the major battle that we're about to see represented here. And after Constantine, before Constantine, every one of the emperors for 340 years or so had been pagan. After Constantine, for 1,000+ years, every one of the emperors was Christian, except for one who ruled for 2 or 3 years. So amazing pivot takes place during the time of Constantine, when the world goes, to exaggerate slightly, from pagan to Christian, or begins that process at least. A huge a hugely important subject. And so how does this room treat that subject? What does the Hall of Constantine say about it? Well, here, this is the day before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which is the decisive battle in which Constantine emerges victorious. Here we see Constantine in the center. He's looking up to the sky. He sees a cross. He sees a Greek banner, in Teutonica, in this sign, understood, conquer. Some of his troops are looking up there. They're excited by this sign. He's spellbound, and lo and behold, the room suggests he embraces the Christian symbol, the cross, and fights under that symbol in the battle that takes place the next day. And this is that battle, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. We're in the year 312, if that matters, on the 28th of October. And this is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and you can see again Constantine right here on his white horse with his lance. Here's poor Maxentius, who also had hoped to rule in the Tiber River. If you go to Rome today, you can certainly see the Tiber River, it's still there. But you can also see the Milvian Bridge, which is where this battle took place. There's some effort on the part of the artists to show the background and the circumstances of the city. But the main point is three angels, one armed, one pointing down. There's Maxentius, get him, suggesting that the divine support that seemed to be promised on the previous day was actually given on the occasion of this particular battle. Brief note, this is historically accurate, I think, at least in that Maxentius is reportedly made the mistake of crossing over the bridge to the non-Roman side of it, and then when he needed to retreat, couldn't get back fast enough because there's only one bridge. So a major strategic failure on his part. The third fresco is the baptism of Constantine, and this is another place in Rome you can still visit, the Lateran baptistry, and Constantine is here represented as without any headgear on his knee before the Pope. Pope Sylvester is baptizing him into Christianity, presumably as a consequence of his recent experiences in the church, in the battle, seeing the cross, etc. And the fourth, we see Constantine again in the center, again on his knees before the Pope. Again, the Pope in all of his finery is here accepting a gift from Constantine. And if you could see it, you'd see it's a little statue representing Rome, and this is called the donation of Constantine, and it is suggesting that Constantine comes before the Pope and says, here, accept all political power in the Western Roman Empire. It's now yours for you to use as you would like. And by the way, you also have authority over all of the other rival Christian churches. So there was some competition there. So that's the subject, that's the important, that's a review of these four frescoes. What do we think about these messages? Now, what I think about the messages is very clear, and I encourage you again to challenge it. They seem, to me at least, to be highly political, highly polemical, highly propagandistic, and somewhat dubious. This is, by the way, just at the time that Martin Luther is challenging the authority of the papacy. The Protestant Reformation has just broken out. These frescoes are done 1520 and following. The theses are posted on the door in 1517, so it's a pretty big time. So I would claim, as based on my studies of it, that the two of the paintings are clearly false. The baptism of Constantine never occurred in Rome, and the donation of Constantine was a forgery that was never, in fact, delivered by Constantine to the Pope. So we have two remarkable paintings, but I don't think that we have reason to accept the claims of the paintings with regard to the baptism or with regard to the donation of Constantine. As for the cross in the sky, and the Battle of the Milvian Bridge with the angels, I find myself quite dubious on those fronts too. It's kind of interesting, or I found it interesting anyway. I asked myself, all right, so what's the evidence that there was a cross in the sky? Well, Eusebius said there was a cross on the sky. And it's true, he did. If you read his Life of Constantine, book 1, chapters 27 to 32, he says Constantine saw a vision in the sky. But Eusebius wasn't present, and this is 25 years after the battle. And then what's the evidence that it really was there? He said, well, I didn't see it, but Constantine swore to me that he saw it. So Constantine swears to Eusebius that there was a cross in the sky. That's the evidence. But why do you need Constantine to swear that there was a cross in the sky if, in fact, Eusebius also says the whole army saw the cross? You'd think it would become rather public knowledge and would be knowledge shared by many, and Constantine wouldn't have to make this oath. And it's also curious that Eusebius wrote another book called The History of the Church. He wrote it before this, and in that particular book, he discusses the battles, but he doesn't mention a cross in the sky. And it's also true if you look in Rome, this is one of the magnificent 3 remaining triumphal arches that you can still see in Rome. This is the Arch of Constantine, and on the Arch of Constantine, especially here, and on the other side, you see sculpted accounts of the battle that Constantine fought at the Milvian Bridge. But there's no sign of a cross anywhere, and there's nothing triumphal about Christianity. So I'm leading you, well, I'm trying to express my opinion that these rooms, beautiful though they are, and I think the skill in the artwork is remarkable, these rooms are using that skill to put forward a message which I find very simple and somewhat dubious. The simple message is that a great political leader knelt down before the Pope and surrendered his authority to the papacy. That elevates the dignity of the papacy, and it should make us, according to the fresco, admire the papacy and support the papacy that much more. And this at a time when the church is embattled with the Protestant Reformation. Now, I think this is partly what makes me love the stanza della Segnatura that much more. So let's turn to the stanza della Segnatura. This is done earlier, approximately 10 years before the Sala di Costantino. These are the names of the 4 paintings that are in it. And this is one which you may not know, but I think it's one of the 2 more famous ones. It's called the Disputa, or the Disputation of the Holy Sacrament. And so what we see here is a hierarchical scene on several levels. On the highest level, obviously, is God and angels, then below him, Jesus, below Jesus, the Holy Spirit, below the Holy Spirit, the monstrance that contains the body and blood of Christ in the communion wafer. So we've got a hierarchy down to the Holy Sacrament as displayed here. We also have a level which shows men with their feet on the ground, a level which shows a group in heaven, and then God up here with the angels above. So there's some identifications that might be made in terms of the people here. And so let's see if we can make a little headway here. This is from the bottom level with a monstrance in the center here, and you can see it here also. In the bottom level, you've got the church militant. That is members of the faith who are still struggling to face the challenges of ordinary mortal life. And so we see here a pope, another pope, and another pope, 3 popes. This is Gregory. I don't know. Somebody says this is Anacletus. Somebody says this is Innocent III. I'm unsure about the evidence, but there you have it. And you've also got, I thought we had a better shot. Oh yes, Dante here. And I mentioned Savonarola a moment ago, and Savonarola here. So there are several identifiable figures that fill this out and give it a little bit of a little bit of content to it. But dominating is the central miracle of Christianity's transubstantiation. That's the core theme here. The middle level is in heaven. We have the church triumphant. And here you have recognizable figures. If the word iconography mean anything to you, it's the little symbols that artists will put in their work to allow you to identify some of the characters that show up. So here is a key, if you look closely. So this is Peter. Here is a sword. So this is St. Paul. This man with a naked chest is Adam, for Adam was naked when he left the garden. St. John the Evangelist, obviously Mary, St. John the Baptist, San Lorenzo, Moses with the Ten Commandments, etc. So we have saints. You notice some have halos with saints. Some Old Testament figures don't have the halo, I suspect, because they didn't have the benefit of living under Christianity. And the doctors in their book, these are the wise men of the church, and lists of books that you can read: the Bible, the letters of St. Jerome, the Moralium of Gregory, and the City of God of St. Augustine. Very faintly, you can actually read their names if you're close enough to see who these doctors of the church are. Okay, we mentioned these. Moses and Paul are the most easily recognized. Dante, and this is a better shot of Savonarola. Okay, so that's the disputa. And on the other side, we get the School of Athens. Here we have a group of about 50 characters that are divided into subgroups, and they're having animated discussions, absorbed in their reading and writing. And we have statues of two gods. So we have over here is Apollo, and over here is Apollo, and here's Athena. So we don't have a god. We have statues of gods in the wall of philosophy, whereas the wall of theology had a god, had the Son of God, had various saints. And so this is just a difference between the two. Scholars like the game of trying to figure out who's who, and I think it's a good game as far as it goes, but it's not reliable. If you go to the internet and search, identify the figures of the School of Athens, you can find different answers from these. Plato and Aristotle are pretty clear because they're holding books. Aristotle's got the Ethics, Plato's got the Timaeus, that's clear. Socrates is a very familiar bust. If I had a sharper slide, you could see that bust. There's one right in the Vatican Museum 100 feet away from this, so you can see his characteristic look, et cetera, et cetera. Heraclitus is said to be a portrait of Michelangelo that Raphael did and stuck in there as a tribute to Michelangelo. Diogenes sprawled all over the place. I've got some, let's say, close-ups to let you see things more clearly. Here you can see this book. When I said scholars say things I don't know on what basis, or they have Plotinus. He's a Neoplatonist scholar. I would have put him over here, but what do I know? So here's this is actually somebody who looks like Bramante, the guy who's tearing down St. Peter's, and he's Euclid doing geometry. This is an important group. This is Socrates here. He's talking to someone in military garb. It's usually taken to be Alcibiades. You may know Alcibiades. Two Platonic dialogues bear his name. He was a general for the Athenians. This is interesting because this is Averroes, who was a Muslim. So we have a Muslim philosopher represented as a student in the School of Athens, and it makes sense because he was very serious about his Plato and Aristotle. And this figure is also very interesting. It's disputed. You can see the characters above that identified this as Hypatia, and said that it's the only woman in the fresco. And it's interesting also because she lost her life in a conflict with rabid Christian zealots who were anti-philosophy. So she paid for philosophy, her philosophizing, the same way, or in a similar way Socrates did. Not at the hand of Christians, of course, but at the hands of his Athenians, who charged him with not believing in the gods of the city, as though his philosophy had led him astray in that particular way. Now, I, liking Xenophon as I do, think that Xenophon should have been mentioned above. Take a look at this guy right here. This is from a book in the 18th century on the frontispiece. Now take a look at this guy right here. Note the headdress, the angle of the elbow, military garb, talking to Socrates. That's not Alcibiades, that's Xenophon, take it from me. And it makes sense because Alcibiades wasn't a very good student of Socrates after all. Xenophon was a great student of Socrates. Okay, so those are the first two rooms there, and I think, well, what do you, big question, everybody has this question. You all have this question, I'm sure. What's the relationship between these two rooms? We've got Christian theology on one side, and we've got philosophy on the other side. So do they go together happily like this, or is there a little bit of tension between these two activities? I think this is the best and most important question about this fresco. Now here is an answer. It comes, I am happy to report this to you because it comes from AI, and I think it's an absolutely terrible answer, which does not prove that AI always and only gives terrible answers, but you may as well seize on them when you have the opportunity. So here's what it says. The disputation of the Holy Sacrament represents Christianity's victory over the multiple philosophical tendencies shown in the School of Athens fresco depicted on the other side of the room. So it's the triumph of Christianity over the multiple philosophical tendencies. So if we had lots of time in a smaller group, I would say, well, what do you think? Instead, I'll just tell you what I think. I think that's loony. There are multiple philosophical tendencies. Look at this. There's no harmony. There's different groups doing different things. Diogenes is sprawled, blocking the advance of Plato and Aristotle as if to suggest he disagrees. Here we've got an atheist, Epicurus, and we've got even our two central figures, not one hierarchy, but two central figures. One's going up and the other's going down. See that, you know, the gestures. Down, oops. Oh dear. Down, says Aristotle, up, says Plato. So this is filled with disagreement. That's fine. Multiple philosophical tendencies is the fancy language that AI is used to describe this. But defeat? What shows that this is defeated? When I look at this as a school, this is the School of Athens, what do I see? I see a brilliant faculty. I see engaged students. I see a beautiful campus. I don't see dispute. I would enroll in this place in a flash, rather than seeing it as discredited. Now, this is what the discredited ancient world should be. It should be represented in this way. The crucifix above, a broken statue of Hermes. You can find his little caduceus here below. There's the defeat of paganism. That's what this fresco is saying. I don't say it's true, but that's what this fresco is saying, is that Christianity has defeated paganism. This is the ceiling of the Sala di Costantino that we discussed earlier. So 4 walls of Constantine, look up, and this is what you see, the triumph of Christianity. So I understand that you could represent the triumph of Christianity in a fresco. I just don't see it in these two frescoes. So keep that in mind and let me know what you think later. Okay. There are 2 side walls in the Sala della Segnatura. And one of them is called the Parnassus. Very briefly on this, this is a side wall representing poetry and the muses, the poetic related things. So you've got the god Doesn't look much like a god to me, but there he is. That's Apollo. And he's got 9 muses representing different activities, including poetry, over which Apollo presides. And then various people that you would expect to... Help! Yeah, that's right, revenge. You've got Homer up there. Next to Homer is Virgil. Next to Virgil is Dante. You've got Boccaccio. You've got a mix. I think this is the interesting point that I would stress. In the Parnassus on poetry, you have a mix of Christian and non-Christian poets together. In the philosophy fresco, the School of Athens, there are no Christians. There's only, could it be this thing? No. Okay, good. That means I'm innocent. I mean, it means that to me at least. I don't know what the authorities would say. Okay, I'm gonna keep going because time is short, and we'll catch up with the slides, I'm sure, at one point or another. So that's the Parnassus. Okay, so what have we done? Disputa, School of Athens, relationship between the two, question mark. Then we've got the Parnassus, poetry, with a pagan god, but some Christians present. And then the last remaining wall is the rule of law or jurisprudence. And in that wall, there are 2 paintings. Oh, yay! Bravissima. Okay, so here is the wall of law or jurisprudence, and it has got 2 frescoes that show a law code being handed over. This is a law code handed to a pope. This is a law code handed to a sovereign ruler, Justinian, and then the virtues up above. So this is a wall that stresses the importance of law in our lives and the importance of virtues in our lives. And I'm just going to quickly race through the virtues. This represents 3 of the 4 cardinal virtues. So we've got fortitude, and fortitude means something like courage, strength. And so there's a lion, so obviously strength. There's an oak tree, so obviously a strong kind of tree. There's armor on. Prudence, who's higher than the other 2 women, she's looking in a mirror because you need self-knowledge if you're going to be prudent. And she's got a second face, an old man looking backwards, because you need to know the past. You need to know history for the sake of prudence. And then on the far right, self-control is holding reins, because you need to hold yourself in check like a horse with a bridle for the sake of self-control. Then the angels represent the theological virtues. Faith pointing up, hope with the flame, and charity gathering an acorn as the fruits of the harvest to share with the poor. So this is interesting and nice because it mixes classical and Christian virtues together on this particular wall. Okay. Ufa. Now, my conclusion, then, or at least my temporary conclusion, is the room as a whole suggests a wonderful harmony between the true, the beautiful, and the good, and encourages us to seek them. Everything looks nice and harmonious, and this harmony is showed also by the medallions in the ceiling. So Justice has this medallion just above it. Reminds me of the big coat, little coat story in Cyrus, to each what is suitable, to each what is fitting. Very beautiful ceiling, harmonious 4 medallions. Here we get the knowledge of causes that goes with the School of Athens. The breath of divinity goes with poetry, and the knowledge of divine things goes for the Disputa. I'm suggesting this. It's a library 4 fields of study: poetry, theology, philosophy, and whatever else it was that I forgot. Law and jurisprudence. And each one has a medallion with a Latin quotation identifying their activities. So as you may be able to detect, I'm trying to speed up here so that I don't take all of your Friday night. So thesis 1, very simple. I think between 3 rooms and 1 room, the 3 rooms being Constantine, Heliodorus, and fire, the other room, the Segna della Segna story, you see a much richer theme here, much more probing investigation of the relationship among various different kinds of knowledge. To exaggerate only slightly, you don't have to accept this, by the way, but when I see in the other rooms, go back to the Constantine room with showing events that never happened that reflect well on the Pope. Pope's up there, spreading holy water on Constantine, who's down like this. It never happened. What I see is an emphasis on propaganda. It's like, this is the message. The Pope deserves to rule. God defends the Pope and the papacy. And then it's repeated. The Pope deserves to rule, and God defends the Pope and the papacy. It's like a chant almost. But in the room of the library, it's complicated. Now my second conclusion is that I'm just not sure whether to say what the relationship is between the Disputa and the School of Athens. I'm suggesting the room is very harmonious, but the fact that there's no triumph of one side over the other, and I don't think there is, I think they both are represented very beautifully, theology and philosophy, doesn't mean that there aren't differences, maybe even irreconcilable differences. Possible evidence is that there's just no gods here. 2 statues, no gods. That's not the case here. That's a big difference. There's a strict hierarchy here. There's not much of a hierarchy here. Plato and Aristotle get a little boost, but not too much. There's disagreement clearly represented in this painting. So I wonder, and there's no overlap of personnel. There's no Pope here, there's no Christian here whatsoever. Why not put a Christian in the School of Athens the way he put Dante in Parnassus? I ask myself, why not even put a philosopher in the room of the fresco of theology? That would be possible. Now, rather than try to answer this question on my own, I just want to introduce you to one quick reading that I've done that raises these kinds of questions better, I think, than I do. And it's by a scholar named John Ruskin. And I'm not a student of John Ruskin. I'm not going to claim to know all there is to know about John Ruskin, but one essay I think is very helpful. John Ruskin was an art critic and generally a writer in the middle of the 19th century. And he was writing in defense of a group of painters with a very strange name, the Brethren of the Pre-Raphaelites. Whoa, brethren, Pre-Raphaelites, what's this mean? Pre-Raphaelites suggest that they wanted to go back to principles of art that were pre-Raphael. So it's their name, even their name is an implicit critique of Raphael. What could be wrong with Raphael? Nobody thinks there's anything wrong with Raphael. He's the most admired painter in the whole Western tradition, except this group. And then Ruskin comes along and he defends them and becomes a spoken defender of the Brethren of the Pre-Raphaelites. What does he say? He says this, quote, "All art for 1,000 years was devoted to serving Christianity. The whole spirit of the Middle Ages was Christian, and it was then Christianity that all men then had to live and to die by. A pure Christian world. Then," he says, "came a new understanding, the modern understanding. And even if this modern view does not explicitly renounce the Bible, it does not rely on it for any important object or goal," he says. the modern age waters down the old Christian view. Now, Ruskin finds this problematic, for as he says, quote, constant Bible reading and Bible thinking made man serious and thoughtful, whereas modern man is less serious and, quote, modern art builds to know God. So a high theme or subject has been removed, he claims. Obviously, he's not writing just about art. He's complaining about the whole tenor of modern life not being as serious as had been the case in the Middle Ages. He can't limit this critique to Raphael. He can't say it's just Raphael. This is the whole spirit of the Renaissance, I think, even though he never uses the name the Renaissance. But the subjects of art, for example, change remarkably so that you get satyrs and nude gods and all sorts of other things besides the Christian spirit that was so dominant in his understanding. According to his lecture, the goal of art then shifts away from the moral emphasis of the Christian period, and instead beauty or things that are interesting becomes the subject, and artists want to do something beautiful, something interesting, and not follow the lead of the other Christian artists that had come earlier. So here's another comment from Ruskin. On one wall in the stanza della Segnatura, Raphael, placed a picture of the kingdom of theology presided over by Christ, the Disputa. And on the side wall of that same chamber, he placed the kingdom of poetry presided over by Apollo. Now this sentence floors me. And from that spot and from that hour, the intellect and the art of Italy date their degradation. Whoa. So by painting the Parnassus, this is my paraphrase of his point, by painting the Parnassus with the god Apollo up there, he implies that for poetic inspiration, you need a pagan god. Raphael does, according to Ruskin. And that, he says, is wrong and dangerous. We need to trace everything back to the Christian God, and we shouldn't sell that Christian God short the way Raphael does by introducing new divinities. So this is striking. It's as if instead of doing Mount Parnassus, he wanted a Mount Zion or something of the sort. Ruskin grants that Raphael was a brilliant artist, but charges that his brilliance did harm by leading other artists to relocate the importance of the artist in his technical skills and in the beauty he produces. So after Raphael, we start looking primarily at these qualities. Is it clever? Is it beautiful? And not at its moral purpose, which Ruskin thinks is primarily the importance of art. So one thing that I don't agree with Ruskin, but one of the things that I think is very good is that he implicates Raphael and the Renaissance in one of the great turning points of Western civilization, when the deep faith of the Christian world began to be challenged by an alliance that combined ancient and modern perspectives. In this respect, I think he is correct, and he does us the great service of focusing our attention on the most important issues, the emergence of modern secularism and the fading of Christianity. On the other hand, if he really means that Raphael was responsible for this change, I just can't buy this. There's too much going on in the Renaissance that points in a similar direction. If the Pandora's box is the right metaphor, the Pandora's box of secular thinking has been opened for a long time before Raphael. Moreover, Ruskin's short speech does not even ask whether the poetry and philosophy we have inherited from the ancients might have some merit. It's as though it's all bad. Could it be that they do pose some challenges for the church, but are still worth our attention? And I consider these two very beautiful paintings that actually serve Christianity, not painting, statue and painting, that serve Christianity that are based on the principles that the Renaissance advanced. Ruskin doesn't imply that you might be able to actually improve the art that serves Christianity by studying of ancient principles. So to Ruskin, Raphael and the Renaissance take a wholly wrong term. As I see it, Raphael stands between two very different but rich views of the world. And the room of the library invites us to ponder the relative merits of these two worlds. And I think this is the invitation that we should accept. So thank you. If you've got the time and the interest, I do too. So fire away in terms of questions or objections. Yes, sir. Yeah.
So I had a question in regards to not just Raphael, but the other Renaissance. They're all known as artists in art sense, but obviously, for instance, in Raphael's case, he had to have a complete understanding of philosophy and history.
Yes.
And that is the other field. So have you read anything that reveals to us a little bit more about perhaps who Raphael was as a scholar or philosopher outside of the art?
Yeah, a little bit. And my answer is a little disappointing, even to myself, because I share your excitement about Raphael's ability to put together the stanza della Segnatura. I think that's what you must be thinking about. However, some scholars take a little bit of the fun out of it by saying things like this, that Raphael was only 27 years old when he showed up and got the commission to paint this room. And so they, on that basis alone, doubt that Julius II would have given him a free hand. Typically, the artist paints what the Pope says. 2 years ago when I was here and we talked about Michelangelo, it was quite striking when he was doing the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He had a plan laid out for him, and then, I don't remember how long, 6 months into it, he said, no way, this is just not enough. And so he made a major protest and he got his voice listened to. I think that's extremely rare. And so scholarly consensus focuses on other people as being responsible for the plan of that room. The usual name is Tommaso Inghirami, Inghirami. And there's a class of scholars at that period in history that generally go by the name of humanists. And they're very well educated, and they love the ancients, they read all the good stuff. And the popes of the Renaissance, not all of them, but many, were generally inclined to include humanists in their court. And Inghirami had a great deal of influence at this stage of the game. Now, Raphael, I think, did become very sharp and well-informed and educated in these matters, but I think it was a slow process, and we don't have to assume that he was responsible for all that at the beginning. He was also close friends with another humanist named Pietro Bembo, who wrote an absolutely beautiful epitaph for Raphael that you can see if you go to the Pantheon, for example. So Raphael traveled in pretty fast intellectual company, but that doesn't mean that the Pope would say, okay, you paint what you want. And I think, if I were, this is my impression, I'd like to believe I'm wrong about this, but if I were Raphael and the Pope came to me and said, I want you to paint 2 scenes of Constantine together with Pope Sylvester that never happened, but will help build the reputation of the papacy, I would feel, I don't want to do that, thank you very much. Now, Raphael, he died in 1520, so he didn't have to do much of it, but I think frequently the artists were told what to do. Sir. Speak louder, please. Possibly, but I'm afraid to touch this because I don't know what might happen.
I was just wondering, so what allows the people within that income or right against those within the school of actors with relation to Socrates, damning them to hell?
Wait. Okay, I'm busy clicking. You're busy asking. Go.
So within that painting there,
Yes.
these people are all saved and redeemed, right?
Not yet. The bottom line is represents life on earth. The upper level is heaven, and above that is God. So I think and not all the ones on the bottom have halos. So I don't know what's going to happen to Dante. I mean, I assume something good, but who knows? Yeah. Well, what you need is a good Christian theologian to explain that, but I think Dante at least is careful to put the philosophers in the first circle of Inferno, which according to some might be a wonderful place to be, actually, with very good company and not too much punishment. So, you know, it's a reasonable question, but I'm probably not the one most authorized to answer it. Part of the doctrine. Yeah, Matt.
In your opinion, what was behind Apollo, well, statues of Apollo specifically in that?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I think I invited that question by saying that the dispute has God represented, and the philosophers have statues. And their statues, the philosophers have no Christians in the group. My suspicion, this is just a suspicion, my suspicion is that it suggests that the harmony between philosophy and faith is more difficult than the harmony between poetry and faith, because you've got Dante represented in the Parnassus, for example, and that suggests that he can live there comfortably. But there is no example given of that sort of accommodation in the School of Athens. And that is also perhaps suggested by the fact that there are no gods in the School of Athens, just beautiful statues. Yeah. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. St. Peter does. St. Paul does. In the middle level, there are several. St. John has a halo. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's very, very faint. I really did my best to get close-ups as much as I could, but at a certain point, the pictures just get blurred. So, yeah, the New Testament characters generally have halos, and if I had better slides, you could see that some have their name written on the halo to assist with the identifications. So, for example, you can almost see it here. That's St. Thomas Aquinas, and he's got a halo with his name on it, personalized halo. And then some of the hats. This is Augustine, and this is Ambrose. And above their hats, they actually have little halos with their names on them too. So they're little aids. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all identified, and I think scholars have made some wild guesses that have been wrong. I do think there's a great guess out there that should be recognized, and that is that Xenophon is present in the School of Athens listening to Socrates. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. And I also think there are other factors involved. For example, Pope Julius II is the one that commissioned the Stanza della Segnatura, and Pope Leo X is the one that commissioned the Sala di Costantino. And so differences between the popes can also affect what they're willing to spend money for in terms of the art that they bring forward. So yeah, and also just other accidents, like what scholars happen to be popular in the Vatican at one particular moment. But yeah, I do think that the Protestant Reformation has something to do with what's happening here, and I think this has a lot to do with the Protestant Reformation. The fact that Julius was paying for these things by selling indulgences just didn't help the cause ultimately, I don't think. Yes, sir.
So, assuming that with the School of Athens, commission specifically, once the School of Athens came, why would that be so? The philosophy, particularly in the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
a place of God,
Yeah.
without a clear illustration of
Yeah. No, an excellent question. I think that's really one of the key questions. And of course, what Ruskin would say is that things have taken a bad turn, and sensitivity to the importance of maintaining a uniform Catholic environment, that sensitivity has been lost. Now, I would also say that there's precedence for this, and this is why I think if it's true that Ruskin really does point the finger of blame, especially at Raphael, I think he's wrong, because Julius II had an uncle who was also Pope. It helped in the Renaissance to come from a very wealthy family and have an uncle who was Pope. So it's hard to have a father who was Pope, but if you can have an uncle who was Pope, that can help. And so Sixtus IV is his name. And he spent a lot of money creating and opening the Vatican libraries that were filled with pagan art. So there was such enthusiasm for this classical world that either they had thought that it was worth suffering a lot for, or they thought there were benefits that would come to the church, or they ceased to care for the church as much. And I don't know what that would be, but this is partly what Renaissance means, this passion for antiquity. Think of I think it's an amazing thing. The Vatican Museum gets open with all of these wonderful pagan statues. So your question is good, but it's not only Julius II, and it's not only Raphael. Maybe that makes it an even better question. Yeah.
As well as the College of Athens. And wonder, given the College of Athens, perhaps it was an attempt by Commissioner Pope Julius to reconcile faith and the progression of the sciences. It would be a philosophical topic during and after the process.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And that's partly what I was trying to suggest, that on the face of it, the room suggests harmony. And I like the medallions in the ceiling because they also suggest that harmony. They're just up there, they're beautiful, they're aligned with the frescoes that go with them. So Philosophus with the School of Athens, you think, what a beautiful package. And I think you could stop there and say this shows the harmony, and we need that harmony because we need the benefits of philosophy, but we also want to maintain the faith. We want it all together. But I also took one little step further, and maybe I shouldn't do that, but a little step further is to wonder, well, would the philosophers represented in this School of Athens, would they agree that this harmony really existed? Or would any one of them think, I need more evidence before I believe? And would the theologians all agree, oh, we need this philosophy? Or would some of them say with Tertullian, what has Jerusalem to do with Athens, or Athens with Jerusalem, and suggest that it's a separate world, unnecessary for a good Christian? So I would, I don't know whether this is, I think this is coherent to say thesis 1, harmony, thesis 2, a little more complicated, possibly. I don't know, I'm not in charge of the time, I don't think so, but I'll keep going until some authority says time. Yes, ma'am. Could you just speak a little bit louder for me? Yeah. Yeah. I thought I was with you right up until, do I think there's a disillusionment? I don't know. I'm afraid I partly didn't hear your question fully and I partly didn't follow it fully. Do you want to try one more time? Yeah. No, it's before. Yeah, Constantine is 1520, it's the last. Fire in the Borgo is the third, 14 to 17. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think the Fire in the Borgo, the 4 frescoes in that room are as egregious as the ones in the Hall of Constantine. I don't think they are as noticeably or certainly false, but they do represent, I would say, relatively minor miracles allegedly carried out by popes and that reflect well on the popes who carries them out. And so you get things like miracles allegedly performed by 4 popes of the name Leo, and one is the Fire in the Borgo. But there's not a, as far as I can see anyway, there's not a probing intellectual interest in that. It just says here is this pope who blessed and a fire that went out. And moving one room over, here's a pope who blessed and a Saracen enemy that turned away and left. That was Leo the Third or Leo the Fourth also. So to me, they also lack the depth of the Stanza della Segnatura. Anyone? Yes. Oh, yeah. That's good. They worked in what was called a giornata, one day, and they had a general idea of how much they could do in one day. And it was usually this much. And it's fascinating because they would draw out what the fresco was going to be on a piece of paper, poke holes in the paper, put that onto the fresh plaster, then throw charcoal dust against it. And that then pull the paper down, and that would leave the outline of the figures. So that stuff still left a lot of judgment, what colors and how to mix the colors and all of the rest of that, but it'd at least have, this person should be this tall, that person should be in this position. So it's a relatively small amount of territory. And of course, they did do touch-up called a secco, dry, but the goal was to get it as much fresco as possible. Yeah, you had a question.
Oh, yes, thank you. So in this fresco, it seems that there are 2 hierarchies. There's a division between what's happening on earth and what's happening in heaven.
Yeah.
But there also seems to be a hierarchy within heaven.
Yeah.
And so I know you talked about Ruskin's critique of Raphael shifting our focus away from like the
Ruskin say anything about, like, to me, this seems like it's a bad interpretation of, or a non-orthodox interpretation of the Trinity, if I'm supposed to see a hierarchy amongst the three members.
Yeah.
With God at the top,
Yeah.
Moses in the middle, and the Holy Spirit at the bottom. That, does Ruskin say anything about that? Because that seems to be the most un-Christian part of it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I don't know whether Ruskin in all of his writings speaks to it, not in the discourse that I focused on. He has nothing to say about that whatsoever. But it is true, if God and Jesus are one substance, you would think there wouldn't be this kind of hierarchy. Good question. No answer. Yeah. Mm. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Well, certainly there was a change, in my opinion anyway, based on what I know in the Renaissance in that regard. Medieval paintings would often have just a hand at the top, the hand of God, but they would not be so daring as to represent God himself. So if you go to Rome in the beautiful apse mosaics of many churches, there will be that hand up there to represent God, but they would go no further. But in the Renaissance, I mean, right down the hall from this, you've got Michelangelo putting God on the ceiling in a big way. So I think that restraint was lost.
I know there's a self-portrait of Raphael.
Yeah.
Are there any other self-portraits?
Yeah, there are others, but
I don't want to make you have to click and go back.
okay, thank you. Yes, Raphael uses various contemporary faces to put on characters in these works, and I have avoided that altogether because it seems maybe cute, but I don't know why it's important exactly. So this is Bramante, for example, who came from Raphael's hometown. He was the famous architect. And Raphael puts himself in the School of Athens on the right side. He's just a young man looking out at the group like this. But I don't know, I don't have a theory on why that's especially significant or important for the interpretation of the painting. Yeah. Averroes. Yes. Yeah, well, I think this is the radicalism of philosophy that he wants to convey, and not hide. So he gives us Averroes, and he gives us the well-known atheist Epicurus. And interesting, I mean, if you want to play around with this, I don't know that this is serious, but this is the face of Tommaso Inghirami, who is thought to have had a lot to do with the design of this room. Now, is he identifying himself as an atheist? That seems very strange. But that philosophy has got to include some radical characters, and Epicurus is not the only one of them. I mean, you've got Heraclitus, presumably here. Socrates himself is a radical character in all sorts of respects. Diogenes. I think that's part of the point. Philosophy is hard to contain, hard to discipline. It goes all sorts of places. Sabrina. Yeah. Yeah, that's very strange. It's a good question. Sabrina observed that a number of the people on the lower level are presumably dead at the time that they're represented there, because they do have halos. And if you look at the time frame represented by them, there's a wide span of ages among them. So why are they there rather than up a level? I don't know. I don't know whether it's a sign of some restraint in terms of judging their excellence and their merits, but I really don't know. One more. Yeah, in the back. Why he didn't do it?
Why he didn't include suffering alongside the will
Yeah.
in the
Yeah. No, I don't. I don't know. I wouldn't be. I mean, I suspect at a certain point, aesthetic considerations would enter also. Just how much can you fit in a fresco? But I don't know. Nor, I don't think I'd have a whole lot to say that's satisfying to me. Do I know why he would exclude some figures and not others? I mean, for me, it's important that he doesn't put a Christian among the philosophers. I find that, whoa. And when he does put one in Parnassus, but, why he, who some of these people are, it's just too hard to figure out, and why it's absolutely crucial. So, is this really an Anaximander? I don't know. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Have a great weekend.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank
But
you.
you're going to get bombarded with questions now, so.
No, I appreciate that.
Thanks, Sabrina. Thanks, Sabrina.
I'm going to take your microphone before you get bombarded.
Before I start.